Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are going to unpack the completely fascinating world of multi-criteria decision-making, which is basically the ultimate toolkit to help you tackle your absolute most complex choices. I am so pumped to guide you through this because we're going to pull back the curtain on the actual mathematical and structural frameworks that professionals use every single day to solve incredibly messy real-world problems. So let's kick things off with a question we all face, probably more often than we'd like to admit. How do you confidently make a choice when the ideal, flawless option simply doesn't exist? Think about it. Whether you're a high-level executive deciding where to build a massive new factory, or, you're just trying to buy a used car or pick university. You don't just care about the price tag, right? You care about the quality, the location, the aesthetic, maybe the environmental impact. And let's be real, rarely does one single option win in every single category. Usually to get something you really want, you're going to have to compromise on something else. So here is our roadmap for today. First, the complex decision paradox. Second, meet your decision toolkit. Third, aggregation, scoring the options. Fourth, outranking, head-to-head battles. Fifth, choosing the right method. And finally, number 6, the final choice. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the complex decision paradox, or what happens when the ideal option doesn't exist. This brings us right to a struggle we all know too well. Just acknowledging that the perfect, unified answer is usually a total illusion. To solve these messy problems, we use something called multi-criteria decision-making, or MCDM for short. Now, a lot of people go looking for an algorithm that will just spit out the objective, capital R, right answer. But MCDM isn't some magical automated magic 8-ball. As the definition points out, it is a systematic discipline for finding a compromise. And the absolute coolest part? It places the human decision-maker's subjective preferences right at the center of the process. It literally takes your unique personal valuations, like say if you value a strict budget way more than premium quality, and structures them into a rigorous mathematical process. And this brilliantly illustrates what a multi-criteria problem actually looks like in practice. Take a typical decision hierarchy for a very real problem, locating a new sports shop. You've got your ultimate goals sitting right at the top. But to get there, you have to weigh these level 2 criteria against each other, things like competition, rental costs, and the risk of vandalism. And then below that, you have your actual alternatives, an industrial area, a shopping center, or the city center. Now, a shopping center might have super high rent but virtually no vandalism. The industrial area, super low rent but high competition. It's like a giant puzzle. How do you possibly weigh those against each other? Well, that brings us to section 2. Meet your decision toolkit. Let's categorize the methods we can use to actually solve this. Over the past 30 years or so, researchers have built a vast array of mathematical methods to evaluate these kinds of conflicting criteria. But as researchers Roy and Busu highlight perfectly here, having so many different approaches can actually be a bit overwhelming. The sheer diversity of these procedures is a strong point, for sure, because there's a tool for literally every problem. But it's also a weakness because, honestly, a decision maker can easily get total analysis paralysis just trying to pick the right method. Up to now, there's no single universal theory that says one method is definitively better than another in every situation. So we really need to categorize them to make sense of the whole shebang. Luckily, we can neatly divide the most popular methods into 2 main theoretical camps. On one side, we have full aggregation approaches, like AHP and Mount. These rely on scoring, taking a complex problem, assigning numerical values to every little thing, and then adding them all up to find the optimal solution. On the flip side, we have outranking approaches like Electre and Promethe. These actually come from discrete mathematics, and they rely on pairwise dominance, essentially setting up head-to-head battles between the different options. Let's unpack that first camp of tools. Section 3, aggregation, scoring the options through a divide-and-conquer strategy. If you're someone who loves structured numerical rankings, we'll start with one of the most widely used aggregation methods in the world, AHP, or the Analytic Hierarchy Process. This method is incredibly popular because it embraces a really simple motto: divide and conquer. When a problem is just too massive to process all at once in your head, AHP tells you to break it down into manageable little subproblems, exactly like we saw with that sports shop hierarchy earlier. You then use pairwise comparisons. So you ask yourself, between rent and vandalism, which is more important to me, and by exactly how much on a ratio scale? You're only ever evaluating 2 things at a time, and then the math behind the scenes aggregates all those micro decisions into one master score. Alternatively, still in the aggregation camp, we have MAUT, which stands for multi-attribute utility theory. Now, this one is heavily used in the Anglo-Saxon world. It fundamentally assumes that you, the decision maker, are actively trying to optimize an overarching function that represents all of your different points of view. But to do this, you have to build what's called a utility function. Basically, it's a mathematical curve that measures your exact degree of well-being or desirability for different outcomes. It's super smart, actually. For example, it mathematically recognizes that earning an extra $2,000 doesn't just double your happiness. Depending on your life situation, it might multiply your utility by 5. MAUT calculates all of this and ultimately yields a complete top-to-bottom ranking with specific scores. Now let's explore the second major approach in our toolkit, Section 4, outranking, or head-to-head battles for when options clash. These outranking methods take a fundamentally different philosophical approach. First up is ELECTRE, which beautifully stands for Elimination and Choice Translating Reality. And ELECTRE is fascinating because it reflects how messy real life actually is. Think about it. In reality, one option rarely completely dominates another in every single category. So ELECTRE establishes what we call outranking relations. This means that even if option A doesn't quantitatively dominate option B across the board, the decision maker can set up thresholds that allow them to confidently take the risk of regarding option A as almost surely better. It's really all about establishing dominance through acceptable risk. Similarly, we have another outranking method called Promethe. This one uses what are called indifference and preference thresholds to pit options against each other. What makes Promethe and honestly outranking methods in general so incredibly unique is that they respect the non-compensatory aspect of criteria. What does that mean? It means a terrible score in one category, like, say, a completely horrible environmental impact, cannot always be magically compensated for by a great score in another category, like a super cheap price. Promethe openly accepts that if two options have totally different profiles, one is amazing at X, the other is amazing at Y, they might just be fundamentally incomparable. So, as a result, Promethe might just give you a partial ranking. It'll tell you the best options, sure, but it will flat out refuse to force the comparison between apples and oranges. And honestly, sometimes knowing two things are incomparable is the most valuable insight of all. With our toolkit established, we arrive at Section 5, choosing the right method. How do we match the tool to the problem? So the crucial point is beautifully mapped out right here. Choosing your method really comes down to two specific constraints: how much subjective effort you are actually willing to input, and what kind of output granularity you need. If you need a complete, rigorous ranking with exact scores, and you have a ton of time on your hands to build complex mathematical utility functions, you go with MOT. But notice, the effort input there is very high. Now, if you want to use pairwise ratios, just comparing two things at a time, you use AHP. But if you want a medium effort approach using thresholds, and you're totally fine with a partial ranking where some options tie or remain incomparable, you might pivot over to ELECTRE or Promethe. You just have to match the tool's required effort to the reality of your project's constraints. But hold on, because no matter which method you select, you aren't done just because the math spit out an answer. As the mathematician Danzig reminds us in this quote, "We absolutely must always perform a sensitivity analysis. This is so crucial. A sensitivity analysis tests the stability of your decision. So if you slightly change the weight of one criterion, say you decide making rental costs is just 5% more important, does your entire ranking shatter? Does a completely different alternative suddenly win? Because if a tiny little tweak flips the whole outcome, your decision isn't robust, and you need to look a lot closer at your data." Let's move to our final section, Section 6, the final choice, and the ultimate decision paradox. All of this builds toward one last, lingering philosophical challenge. As you look at all these methods we've covered, AHP, MOT, ELECTRE, Promethe, the literature reveals a brilliant, completely unavoidable paradox. The very act of deciding which decision-making method to use is in itself a complex, multi-criteria decision, right? You have to weigh your available time, your mathematical ability, the precision you need, and the type of problem you have. It's a total meta-problem, and honestly, it just proves how deeply ingrained these frameworks really are in the fabric of human logic. So, leaving you with that mind-bending thought, I want to ask, now that you are fully equipped with this robust toolkit, how are you going to structure your very next big choice? Will you divide and conquer with AHP? Will you build out a utility function? Or will you set thresholds and let your options battle it out head-to-head? The absolutely perfect option might not exist out there, but now the perfect method to find your compromise is entirely within your grasp.
Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep structuring, and keep learning.